Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and in a previous video I created a Express API with Mongo in about 50 minutes. Okay, that's my Express Mongo zero deploy video. I highly recommend watching that video first before you watch this one, because essentially I'm going to take that API, although I'm going to run it locally instead of using the deployed one, because I've since deployed that Heroku deployment, and build the React front end. So you can see like, okay, hey, if I have this API, how would I build it out on the front end? Okay, and I'll link to both repos in the video description when I'm done. But let's do it. Let's see if I can build the whole front end with a little bit of styling within an hour. Okay, so let's do it. So first I'm gonna go get the API going. So I'm gonna open up a terminal in the folder with the API. I'm going to do an npm run, actually just npm start should work. Good, we're connected to Mongo. Our server is listening on port 10,000. I've since updated my Mongo to Mongo 5.0, so I don't think all that data is gone. So I should have a blank database, but that's fine. Maybe what I'll do is I'll add a couple to-dos just to get started. So let me go to open up Insomnia. Again, Insomnia, Postman, they do the same thing. It all works. And if you want to get real fancy, you could always build Swagger into your Express project, where basically you have like a Postman / documentation built into your app. It's pretty cool. That's called Swagger. Okay, so let's do a post request. Let's just add a few to-dos. Okay, and then let's use a local URL. So that's HTTPS. HTTP / actually I don't even need to do that for Insomnia or Postman. Localhost 10,000 / to-dos. Okay, and we'll just do my standard, which is eat breakfast, eat lunch, eat dinner. Eat breakfast, send. Eat lunch, eat dinner. Okay, let's make sure they all got added. So I'm gonna do a get request to / to-dos, and they're all there. Oh, okay, and my previous data is there too still. Nice. Okay, ain't nothing wrong with that. Okay, so I don't need that anymore. Now what I need to do is generate a React project. So I'm gonna open up a new terminal, because I want that other terminal running my backend server. Cool. And then I'm going to do, if I had my deployed Heroku URL, still I would just use that URL and not bother with running the backend locally. But here we are. So I'm going to use the Vite template, React template. So npm init Vite. I just find it easier to set up. You know, it's less characters than npx create React app. Okay, project name. We're just going to call this React to-dos. All one word, so that way the folder is only one word. I don't care about any of this other stuff. I want to do the React project. I want just a standard React project. Good, and now there's my React to-dos folder. So cd React to-dos, and I'm going to do an npm install, because in this case it doesn't install the libraries automatically for you. So that's going to go install. Good. Neat. Let's see here. Other things I want to install. Npm install React router. And I'm going to also install, do I want to install anything? Let's install Sass. Let's make this Sass. Let's use Sass. Npm install React router, Sass. I think we'll keep it at that. I mean, there's other stuff I could use, but I don't want to get too fancy. I was tempted to use React request, but we'll keep this plain vanilla. Okay, so first things first, let's rename the CSS file to Sass. So rename index.css to index.sass. So that way we're using Sass. And then I'm going to change this to, no, actually not Sass. I want to rename it to SCSS. I'm not good with that whole tabby syntax. I prefer just the standard CSS-y Sass. So SCSS. and that's app. I'm not going to use that, so that's fine. So I can get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of the CSS file. No need for the clutter. I'm just going to use one CSS file. That's going to be this one, and that's going to be imported in main. So Sass. There we go. And I don't need the logo, so let's get rid of the logo. Move the trash. That's imported in app, so let's get rid of that import from there. And let me clear out the dev here and just put some words. App is working, so that way there's something I can see on the screen. And that is good for the moment. So let's just start the server, npm run dev, because when you're using the Vite React template, it's not npm start, it's going to be npm run dev. Okay, so basically no matter which React template you work, it's always smart to go take a look at your package.json so you know what the scripts are. Okay, cool, npm run dev. Okay. Cool, pre-bundling dependencies, yada yada yada. Okay, that's all fun and good. Now let's take a look in the browser. Localhost 3000 for our React app. Okay, and oh, it's still looking for Sass. Okay, so let's go fix that. Main should be SCSS. You can tell I literally just woke up. Okay, so let's go back to the browser. Now it's working. Okay, setting up my windows. Okay. So I have installed React Router, so one of the first things I'm going to want to do is set up React Router. Now, there's a couple things I'm going to do. Import browser router as router from React Router. So let's do that. Okay, and what I am going to do is, let's see here, react.strict mode. Just wrap this whole thing with React Router or router. Now a little trick I like is that I'll just make app a route, so that way it has the router props available to it, so I can pass the router props down as props from app, which can make life a little bit easier sometimes. So what I do is I just change this to this. I just say, so I need to actually import route from router, route. Okay, and then what I do is I'll just say route, and then we'll use the component form of writing a route, and just say the component is app. Okay, and then I gotta put a path. Path equals slash, and since slash, I'm not putting the exact keyword, it's always gonna be on the screen. Okay, so it doesn't matter what the route is, this route will always be active, always having app on the screen, although we're not seeing that at the moment, so let me refresh. Let me see here, route, path, component, app. What doesn't it not like? Router, route. Let's take a look at the console. Okay. Uncutting dicta. React. Oh, wait. Where did I install? Package.json. Oh, I didn't reinstall React Router DOM. My bad. So let me just fix that real quick. Npm uninstall React Router. And then use 2 ampersands to do another command. And npm install React Router DOM. Again, you can tell I just woke up. Okay, that's better looking. Okay, let's do an npm run dev. Let me go back to my main.jsx here and fix this. It should be React Router DOM. And there we go, we're working. We're up and running. Now, there's certain pieces of data that I'm going to be using throughout the entirety of the app. I think I'm going to use context to deliver. Let me think about them. What would be good to just kind of pass around that I'll be using a bit. Nah, I don't think context is going to be necessary for this. Okay, app is working. So first thing we want to do is get our data. Okay, we have this data that's called to-dos and we want to get it. So we're going to need state to get the to-dos. And generally when we're going to make an API call, I always want to make sure I have views effect handy. So I'm going to import that. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is just make state to hold our API data. Okay. Const make our API data. So const, these are going to be to-dos slash set to-dos, because it's to-dos, use state null. Cool, so there's my state. Okay, and what I am going to do is say, make a function to retrieve data, because I always like using async away, it just looks cleaner. So we're going to say const get to-dos equals async okay, get to-dos equals async. And what this is going to do, let's think about it. It's going to const get the response. So get const response equals await fetch. Now here's the thing. I'm going to want to pass that URL. I want that URL in a variable. So API URL. I just think it looks cleaner that way. Okay, and I always think of this as the base URL because there's going to be like modifications we'll have to make to it later. Const URL equals, and you have to put the HTTP. If you don't put the HTTP and just put localhost 10,000, what's going to happen is that it's going to think it's part of your website, and the API calls will fail, and you'll be wondering why. Okay, so always make sure you have an HTTP or HTTPS in front of a URL when you do a fetch, or else it's going to try to make a request. It just basically lops localhost 10,000 at the end of like localhost 3000 or whatever your URL is. You don't want that. Okay, so that's going to make the request. Again, right now I'm just writing the function, so it's not making the request yet. Now, once I get that response, I want to turn that response into JSON. So we'll say const data. I always like to call it data. Well, you can call it whatever you want. Some people call it JSON. Await response.json. And then I'm going to want to set my state, set to-dos to that data. Okay. Now, that's all fine and good. I have a function to get the data, which I'm going to actually use quite a bit. But I want to call this function at least once when this component loads. Okay. This is where useEffect comes in, because the useEffect hook takes two things. It takes a function and an array. Okay, now this function is going to run immediately when the component first loads. So if I were to write console.log cheese, okay, and I refresh this page, see, this cheese happens right away. So I want the same thing to happen with this get to-dos function. So I'm going to replace this console log with just a call to get to-dos. Okay, and ta-da. And the cool thing about that is that the useEffect, this function will only ever run again if between renders any values in this array changes, and since there's nothing in the array, it will just never run it again. So that's cool. Okay, so now before I go any further, let me just double check a couple things. I want to first see, hey, do I see the request in my network tab? Is this it? Let's take a look. No, that's the 3000. Well, actually, we'll probably say slash to-dos. So where do I see slash to-dos? Oh, wait a second. I'm going to get back hello world, aren't I? Because I just called localhost. So, yeah. I'm not calling the right URL anyways. See, hello world. I'm getting back that hello world route that I made on because technically the API is at /todos. So I want to make sure I put /todos there at the end of the array. Notice I don't put that ending slash. Okay, because I want to, you'll see, I want to do that later. I don't want that, what's called a trailing slash at the end. Because it'll end up confusing me, and I'll end up with like double slashes later on and having me hunting around with like why my URL isn't working. It's just easier to not have it there. So now if I refresh this, so now we see the localhost request. That's that one. Actually, should be just, here we go, to-dos, and see we're getting our to-dos. So we're getting our to-dos data, so I know that the API call is happening. I can see that. That's good, and I can see that this was a successful request because it's a 200. Good. So now the question is, did that data make it to state? So I'm going to open up my components and go to my app component where I did this, and I see the state. Good. It looks like they updated React DevTools. That looks nice, this whole 1, 2 thing. And there we go. Okay. And nice, 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 nice. Okay. So, nice. Now I can start like working with the data. So I'm gonna shut off the server for right now, so that way it just doesn't keep making the API call every few seconds. I'm gonna basically create like an H1 that says, you know, Alex's to-do app. Okay, and then we're gonna put the router there, which I need to import. So let's import React router. Let's import. And I'm going to need, eventually I will need route, I will need switch, and I will need link over this build from React router DOM. Okay. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to create the switch. So that way only one of these routes will show up at a time. Okay, and I always just from the get-go do the long, kind of do the long setup. So route, render, although one thing that's kind of nice is that since I made app a route, and I made it a route using that style that I did, it has the router props. So I don't necessarily need to do that whole style. I could just pass the router props from app into my different routes. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So I'll show you what I mean a little bit later on, but let's just set these up. So first I'll just put an H1s, main route. So in this case, route path. Well, this time I want, for this one I want exact path. Exact path equals slash. Okay. And then for this one, we're gonna have one version of it that's new for the new form. Okay, and then another one that's gonna be edit for the edit form. Okay, and that's good for now. That's enough. Okay, we'll keep it simple. Okay, so first things first, I'm gonna run this, just make sure that all these routes work. Edit form before I actually like start building all this stuff out. So npm run dev. There we go. Okay, cool. So now how do I test this out? First, what I'll do is I'll type in /new. Okay, new form, good. Then I'll type in /edit. Edit form, good. Okay, so that's all fine and good. Okay, that works for me. So what I'm going to do is we're going to make some components. So let's make a components folder, new folder, components, and I'm going to want a new file for like display to-dos .js. Actually, I'll just follow the, since this particular template uses JSX, I will just use the JSX extension. Doesn't really matter. Display to-dos. Let me rename that. That should just be called display with uppercase display props.jsx, and then rename my nope, not the folder, new file, form.jsx. Notice I'm only making one form component, even though I'm going to need a form to create a to-do and one to edit a to-do. If you construct your components in a sort of smart way, you can reuse them, which is really cool. Okay, so let's see here. Okay. Let's just put our boilerplate. Import React from React const form equals props, return an h1 hello form, export default form. Okay. Now, let's see here. Let's copy and paste this. And then this will be display. And I'm going to do this in a different way. Instead of using like ternary operators and different options, I'm going to just make this a sort of very explicit. I'm going to use an if statement just to show you that you can do this. So I'm going to say if props.todo, so we're going to pass the to-dos onto this component. If props.todos is truthy, then we'll return one thing. So we'll return a div, and we'll say to-dos here. And then else, if to-dos is not truthy, we will return an h1 that says either still loading or no to-dos. Okay. And then that is the component. Let me save it so that way it just makes it all nice and pretty. There we go. So that's one way to do it. Sometimes I like to do it with like a loaded or loading function. I'm still probably going to want to wrap this in a function. I think this might be okay, because I think it'll only evaluate this code if the if statement is effective. We'll see what happens. Okay, we might still have to refactor that a little bit. Okay, so let me import these components. Import display from /component/display. I should have called that folder pages, but whatever. I just rename it because they're both pages. Rename pages. Automatically update imports, sure. Okay, so then this will be pages display. Okay, and then I want to import form from, and again, the difference is whenever it's a route, like if it's a component that's going to be rendered by a route like this, it's convention to put it in the pages folder because it represents a page of your website, while if it's not like wrapped in route or part of like a route that gets rendered by a particular URL, it should be a component because it represents a piece of your website. So that's why you have a components and a pages folder typically. It just helps you kind of clarify how you intend to use the component. So form from /pages/form. Okay, cool. Now, next thing I want to do is I'm going to just put them in the routes that I plan on using them in. So this one should have display. And I want to pass it the to-dos. So to-dos equals to-dos. So that's going to be passed in as props. Okay. This is going to end up getting form. Form. And this is going to end up getting form. And then that's that. So now if I go back to the main page, let's see here. And so you can see like the still loading for like a hot second. So see, so still loading, the API call finished, and now you say to-dos here. And that's why you need to check for that, because again, on the first render, the API call starts as the first render has already begun, because it's all everything happening is part of that first render. In the first render, so you have you never have your data on your first sort of paint of the website. So you always have to kind of plan that I'm gonna have to check, hey, this data's not here yet. When it is here, then I want to do something. So you can do that with ternary operators, through optional chaining. There's if statements. There's endless ways you could do this. But point is, you got to somehow check for this. Okay, so we've confirmed that that's working. Okay, now let's try rendering. Try rendering the actual data that's in the to-dos. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to render the to-dos as a UL. So I'm going to make this a UL that gets rendered. And then what we're going to do is we're going to map. So we're going to say props.todos.map. So for each to-do in the to-dos, okay, we're going to return the following JSX, which is just really going to be an LI. The LI does need to have a key because it's a map, so we'll say key equals to-do.id because it's from Mongo, so every to-do should have an ID. Actually it's going to be underscore ID. Okay, and then we're going to have every to-do should have a reminder property. Okay, because we go back and take a look at the schema of our to-dos in the Express app. So I go back to models and we look at our schema, see every to-do has a reminder and a completed property. Okay, so key to-do, so this would be like to-do.reminder. So again, for each, the way this reads when I do a map is saying for each to-do, return this LI, and then it creates an array of an LI, and that gets rendered on the screen because JSX can render arrays of JSX. That's just technically what's going on under the hood. Cool. So let's see here, save. So that's all good, and see, like, there's all my to-dos. So they're getting rendered just fine. So this works. This works. Now, next step. Okay, let's make it possible to create a to-do, but now we need to set up this whole form component. So this would be a controlled form, and if we set this up right, we don't need to make two forms. We can use the same form for creating and the same form for editing. So this means we're going to have to heavily rely on some information coming from our props, such as the initial state of our form. Okay, so the form state. So here we're going to create state for the form. So I'm going to import use state from React. So basically, we're going to sit there and say, I'm going to assume that some things are coming from props. Const props. I'm going to assume that props is going to give us a function. Let's see here. Actually, it's going to give us a initial state. So like, how should the form be initially? What should be initially on the form? We are going to have a submit func. So like, what function do you want to be run when the form is submitted? Because hey, we want to do something different than when you edit versus when you create. So we're going to have say, hey, you give me the function you want me to run when you click that submit button. And then I'm going to want a label because we want that submit button to say like create, update, whatever it needs to say. So I need to get all this stuff. I expect all of it to come from props. So I'm going to go in there and go in there with the idea that that's coming in from props. Okay, now form state. So const form, we'll just call it form state, set form state. And the idea is that the form should initially be whatever the initial state is. So use state initial state. The reason being is that maybe the form should start out, if you're editing someone, the form should have initially like that person's information or that to-do's information, versus if, you know, if it's a new to-do, it should be a blank form. Okay, and so in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a default for initial state, and the initial will be a blank. So reminder equals nothing, and completed equals false. Okay. So cool. So that has a default value. So basically, if I don't specify the initial state, then it's automatically going to be a blank thing. That's just going to be one less prop I have to put for one of the situations because I did a default. Okay, and then label, just in case, we'll do a default on that too. Default will be submit. So that way if I don't put the word like create or update, the button will just say submit. Okay, so again, some nice defaults. One of the beauties of destructuring, I can destructure, grab the variables from props, but I can also give them default values. Yay, destructuring. One of the best things in JavaScript ever. Okay, so moving forward, let's actually start sketching out this form. Okay, so the way this should look like is we're going to have a form tag. And inside the form, there's going to be a input with the type of text. And the name of this one is going to be reminder because this represents the reminder field. Okay, and again, it should always it should match the name of the schema. So if the schema, the property is called reminder, then in the state, it should have a reminder property, and the name property should be called reminder. All those should match. Now, I'm going to want to bind this to the state. So I'm going to say the value prop is going to be bound to the form state dot reminder. Okay, and then we're going to have, well, we'll come back to that. Okay, so there's the input. Then there's going to be a checkbox input. Okay, cool. Now the way this one's going to work, and the checkboxes are a little bit trickier. So if I remember this correctly, checkbox is the type. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to head over to this, type in /new here, just so I can see what the form's looking like. Okay, so see, there's the checkbox. The value is called completed. But I'm not binding the value. Actually, checkboxes have a special property called checked. And that's what we're going to want to bind to completed. Okay. And right now, basically, I can't type in the box, and I shouldn't be able to check the box. So it's always going to be false right now. And the submit button, so input type equals, okay, submit. So this is going to be a submit button, and then the value should be the label, because we want the button to say whatever the label variable gives us, so that way we can customize the name. So right now it's going to say submit, because right now it's showing me the default value, because I haven't passed any props yet. Cool, so let's save this, let that kind of like get a little bit prettied up. Now, of course, right now, this is a controlled form, so I can't type in it because I don't have a handle change function. So that's the next thing I got to do. Okay, the handle change function. I'm going to write it the long way, so that way, there's a more quick, succinct way of writing it, but I'm going to write it the long way, so that way the logic of it makes more sense, or is more clear. So const handle change equals, and again, anytime I use the word handle, generally that's a function naming convention for events. So you're saying, hey, this is going to respond to an event. This responds to the inputs on change event in React, which is a little bit different than the on change event not in React. Okay, this is like one of the things where like React changed the name of something. So on change, when you're not in React, just means like, hey, I clicked on the form, I typed some stuff into it, and then I unfocused it. So now the form has a different value. In React, on change is going to be like literally any change in the value, whether you focused or unfocused. So just in case you ever like try to do this like not in React, and you try to like do like a plain vanilla version of this, just realize like that one has a minor difference between, like I had to learn that the hard way. Not that long ago either. Okay, you do so much React, you take some for granted. Some things some things are just unique to React. Okay, so handle change, but again, just like any event, it receives the event object. Okay, that tells you all about the event. Now, of course, what we want, the goal of this function is to take, I'm going to change the form, and since the form is bound to the state, what I want to do is send that information back to the state, update the state, so that way the form can keep the change. So that's essentially what you're doing. You're trying to update the state, this form state, every time you edit the form. That's the goal here. So always thing you want to do is create a new state or create a new object, because again, referential equality, you don't want to pass the same object because then it won't update. Okay, so in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const new state equals a new object that is just a copy of the form state. So when I do this whole like spreading, I'm making a copy of the object. So that way, even though it has the same properties, it's a unique object with sort of a unique ID under the hood. Because again, if I just sit there and I just edit the form state as it is and then pass it into set state, it won't update the form because it's the same object. Okay, React only updates if the state is something new. Okay, in objects, it's not the properties that make it a new object, it's the underlying sort of like ID of the object. Okay, if you watch my video on like reference versus value, if you want to go deeper into that rabbit hole. So I'm creating a new state, okay, and then I want to say, hey, in this new state, I want to update the property that matches this form element. Okay, so how do I know which form element it is? Well, every form element has a property called name. And which one I'm typing in is going to be the event target. So the event target is the thing that I typed in, or the checkbox when I click on it. So that's going to be the event target, and I'm going to use the name property. So what's going to happen is that when I type in the reminder box, this is reminder. When I click on the checkbox, this is completed. So I'm updating the property that matches. Now here's where it's going to get a little funky, because one of these I need to check for value, one of these I need to check for state. So technically I'm going to have to do this slightly differently. So we're going to have to create two functions, essentially, is what we're going to have to do. Or actually maybe not. I'll see if I think I have an idea. Okay, so I'm just going to comment that line out for a second. Here's what I'm going to do. Console.log event. Let's console log the event. Okay. So that way when we click on it, and then let's just add the onChange handler to these things. So onChange equals handle change on that input, and onChange equals handle change on this input. Okay, so I'm going to look at my console, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click the checkbox. Okay. Okay, still not quite doing what I wanted to do. Did I trigger it right? Handle change. Form state. On change equals handle change. Console.log the event. What does it not like? We don't even get the log, so that means the function's not running. Let me refresh the page. Oh, okay, so it's just erroring out, that's why. Okay, so somewhere, here we go. This is why it's, VS Code decided to like inject the line in my code. That's why it's complaining. Thank you, VS Code, for messing things up. But let's see here, if I click on the checkbox, okay, there it goes. So I'm going to look to see if there's a way for me to kind of tell that this is a checkbox. So type change. Here's we go. Target. And here's say anything about checkbox. Let's see what the value is too. Value. V. O. P. lots of properties. v value on, but that's always going to be honest. What's the problem with that? Okay, and then if I go back to checked, well, in my case it was false because it's still bound to false. But okay, so I could just use a name property. Why am I not just doing that? Okay, I was trying to see if I could like do like, if it's a checkbox, do this. If not checkbox, then do the normal thing. Node name input, but let's just see. I just want to see if there is something other than name that I could use out of curiosity. True. Here we go. Type checkbox. There we go. Okay, so we can do that. So just because in case you have multiple checkboxes, if event.target.type equals checkbox, we're going to do one thing versus the other. Okay. And then else do something else. And again, this is just because checkboxes need special handling. So I'm going to keep this is how const new state. Well, this should be done either way. Control X. So let me just put that after. Let's just replace this console log. We don't need that anymore. Okay. So if it's a checkbox, then essentially what we're going to do is say new state event.target.name equals event.target.checked. Okay. Vice versa, if it's pretty much any other input, minus a few other unique ones, it should be event.target.value. It's the value property that we want to grab. Okay. But once we update it in that new object, then we want to set the state, set form state, and set the new form state to the new state. And there we go. That should do what I want it to do. So let's see here. Can I click the checkbox now? Yes, I can. Good. Okay. Good. It's working. Now, just one last check. Let's just make sure that my state's updating correctly. So I'm going to go to the components, head over to the new component down here, form, and then I'm going to look at the state. And let's just see here. If I click on the checkbox, is a toggle from true and false? Yes. Yes. Okay. If I type in there, does that update? Yes. Good. Okay, so we got the information we need. Okay, so that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Okay, so that handle change function does what it does. Based on my changes to the form, it updates the state. So the last piece is we need to be able to submit the form. Okay, so that's going to be a handle submit function we need to make. Okay, so the handle submit function. So here's what's going to happen. Const handle submit equals, and again, I'm going to want the event, because again, handle means an event handler, and I want the event. Okay, and first thing I always want to do when I'm handling a form submit is to prevent default, to prevent the refresh of the page. So I always want to do that like right away. Now that I've done that, I don't need to do anything in particular myself. I'm going to allow the props to handle it. So again, one of the things I expected from props is the submit func. So I'm going to say, hey, submit func, whatever submit func you gave me, I'm going to use it, and I'm going to pass it the form state. So whatever the function is, I'll give it the form state. You decide what you want to do with it. Okay? So form state. And whatever function we give it, we'll handle it from there. Now, here's the thing, though. Once the form has been submitted, I kind of want to push them back to the main page. So I'm also going to expect that they're going to pass me history for this component. I'm going to want history. Okay, so I'm going to expect that app is going to pass that down as props, because again, app has access to the router props. I'll explain that in a moment. Okay, actually I can just show you right here. App. See, app has history, location, match. So it can pass them down. Why does it have access to that? Because of the way I set up router. By setting up app as its own route, like this, it has those, and then I can just pass them down without having to like do all that funky stuff. Funky like render prop stuff. Okay, so back to form. Okay. Now, so basically submit func. That'll do whatever it's going to do. And then I just want to do history.push, and I'm going to push you back to the main page. Okay, so basically you submit the form, you go back to the main page, you finish the thing you were doing. And that's it. This form should be complete. Okay. Like right now it's not going to do anything yet because we're not giving it a function, all this stuff. So I think it'll still at least push me back to the main page if I hit submit. No, because the form error. Oh, because I didn't actually connect the function. So we have the handle submit function, but I actually need to wire it to the form tag. So on submit, and again, that's an event on the form element. So you don't put it on the submit button, you put it on the form tag. Handle submit. Okay, so now what happens if I click submit? It's going to error because there is no submit function right now. Okay, what I can do is I can give this a default of an empty function. So that way I don't get that error. Okay, so just say, hey, if I don't give you a function, just make it an empty function. So if I hit submit, okay, cannot read property push of undefined. History, oh, because I didn't pass history in there. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so we do need to pass down some props. So on new, so let's go back to our app. So again, what are the props that it expects? We're not going to worry about initial state because again, that default is going to handle it for new. Okay, so that's fine there. But we do need to pass in a submit func, which, you know, we'll come back to that. So I'll just pass an empty function for now. Okay, we need to pass a history. Okay, so history will equal props.history. Because again, app has history in its props, so props.history. And a label. A label which will equal create. Okay, let's refresh. What doesn't it like now? Props is not defined. Oh, because I didn't define props in app. So I gotta make sure I add props here in app. There we go. And see, notice it's receiving the props. So see, it says create now instead of submit. Okay, so that's the beauty of like being able to use like components. You can make them super customizable if you're willing to kind of imagine what props can be passed in and what kind of things can be like, okay, hey, what things do I need to define in the component? What thing can I let my particular usage define through props? Okay, so now if I click this create, see, it'll push me back to the main page. Good. Okay, wonderful. Okay, but we do need to create a create function. Okay, so let's work on that. So let's create another function. Function to create to-dos. Okay, const create to-do equals async function. It's going to receive the new to-do. Okay, so again, we're passing it that form state because that's what's going to happen. So what's going to happen is that we're going to wait, fetch. I'm not going to even bother saving the response in a variable because I don't need it. All I care is that we do the fetch. So again, it's going to be the URL, so it's to /todos, except now I need to change a little bit. So I'm going to pass in the second argument to fetch. And in the second argument to fetch, I'm going to say, hey, I want to do a post request. And I got to specify that, hey, you know what? This data is a JSON data. So I have to create, nope, let me just get rid of that object. I have to pass in a property called headers. Headers is an object with certain data that needs to be passed in, like content type, which specifies that, hey, the data I'm sending over is JSON. That's how the express.json middleware knows to parse the body. It's going to be like, oh, content type is application JSON. Well, in that case, I need to parse it. Okay, and then I need to send over the data. So the new to-do object, like that form, should already have, you know, that form state is going to have all my properties perfectly bundled in an object. So I don't really need to do anything other than send it. So I'm going to just add the body property and then do JSON.stringify. That's going to turn the JavaScript object into a JSON string. And I'm just going to pass in the new to-do, and there it goes. Okay, that's going to make the API call. But once that is done, then I'm going to want to like update my to-dos. So I'll do a get to-dos again. Okay, so that way I'm going to update the to-dos. So let me just put some comments here. Make new to-do. Update list of to-dos. And that'll update my state. And so right now I should, let me just pass this down now. So I'm going to take this create to-do function, pass it down as my submit func. So essentially when you hit submit on the form, it's going to do this create to-do function. Okay, so now this form should work. So I just need to add a button to the form. That's why I need a link. So we're going to just say button. Well, first we'll do a link to /new. Okay, and we're going to say to do create a to do. Okay, that's going to create a to do. Nice, and that's fine, but I want to make it a button. So let's make it a button. And just put the button there. So see, now we have a button. So if I hit create a to do, see, it takes me to the form because the link changes the route. It's changed the route, which changes the component that's rendered, because again, these routes determine which component gets rendered or what JSX gets rendered based on the URL. So now I'm going to say new to do eat brunch, and I hit create, and see, now I have eat brunch. Okay, so good. We now have it that you can create a to do. Okay, so that's not so bad. Now we just need to make it where you can edit a to do. The question is, how do we know which to do is the one you want to edit? And I'm going to want to pass that down as the initial state to the form in the edit situation. So I got to figure out how I'm going to do that. So since this is going to be another variable that, hey, when that might affect what's going on in my UI because it affects what's showing up on the form, it's going to need to be state somewhere. But I'm not going to use my existing state. This state is just to hold my list of to-dos. So I'm going to create a separate piece of state to hold the to-do you want to edit. Okay, so const state to hold edit target. So we'll call this const to do to edit. Okay, set to do to edit. And we'll make it use state. Okay, use state, and again, we'll just kind of use like a blank object to start off with, which is fine. Okay, cool. Use state. Okay, and then that's going to end up getting passed down to our edit form. So let's see, notice I'm using two different instances of form, one for creating, one for editing. So we can kind of pass down the things we need now. Submit func we don't have yet. So I'm just going to pass in an empty function for now. We'll come back to that. But we need to pass in history, so let's pass in history again. History props.history. Okay, the label, which is going to be this time update. And then the last one, which will be the initial state. The initial state, which will equal the to do to edit. Okay, so that way it's always going to reflect that to do that we want to edit. But now we need to figure out how to fill in this to do to edit. Like, how do we know which to do you want to edit? Okay, well, that's going to have to happen in the display component because that's where the to dos are listed, and I want to make it where if you click on a to do, you can edit it. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass in to display to dos set edit. Okay, or we'll call it edit this to do equals set to do to edit. Okay, cool. And I also going to want to pass in history because what's going to happen is that when you click on a to do to edit, I want to set that state, but then I want to push you over to the edit form. So I'm going to need history to do that push function to push you to a different page. So I'm going to pass in history as well. So history equals props dot history. Props dot history. Okay. So now if I go back to the display, what I can do is I can add an event listener. So what would happen is we just say here, we're going to say on click equals, and then I'm just going to literally write the function right in line. Okay. So we can just say event. Okay, I'm literally just writing this function right in line. And what I want to do is use props dot edit this to do, I think it was. Okay, and then I'm going to pass in the to do, because again, right now I'm mapping within this context here, within these lines, I'm mapping, so I have access to the individual to do inside of the map. So I'm taking advantage of that. Let me just see, what did I call that? Edit this to do. That's the name of the prop. Edit this to do. So back to display. So props dot edit this to do. Let me just close some of these other pages. Props dot edit this to do. Nice. And then after we set that state, what I want to do is then do a props dot history dot push, and then push you over to / edit. Okay. And then that's it. Okay. So theoretically, so let's refresh. I should be able to click on eat your vegetables and it should take me to the edit form. So let's see here. 1, 2, 3. Ah, and look, see, it's already filled in. Eat your vegetables. And apparently eat your vegetables is true. So now I can check it off, update it, even though right now it doesn't say if it's like done or not. So what I should do is actually add something here like this. So that way we can take advantage of that true or false and just sit there and say something like to do dot completed. If it's true, then write done, else incomplete. So that way, like, there's some text there. So see, done, done, incomplete. So if I go to brush your teeth and I say, hey, let's mark it as true, I hit update it. It doesn't quite update it the way I would expect it to. That's a concern. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to examine. Oh, because we haven't done an API called update yet. That's right. We haven't made the edit function yet. Okay. But I can create a to do. So here we go. Let's say cheese. And if I make it true to begin with, say cheese is done. Okay. So we actually still have one more piece left. I never actually made this submit func. So again, we take a look here. I'm just running an empty function every time I want to edit the to do. So let's fix that. So I'm going to copy this create to do function because it's going to be almost the same. The only difference is what is it complaining about? Okay, so it's complaining that I've created this function more than twice. So this is going to be update to do now. So if I change that name, that should fix everything in the screen. Update to do. Now here's the thing I'm banking off of. Like if I click to edit a to do, again, see, it knows which to do I'm editing because I had that whole like to do to edit state that keeps track of which to do I'm trying to edit. But when I do that, now let's take a look at what you end up with. So if I go here, the state, it's not just the reminder and completed, but it's also the ID. So I can take advantage of that. So I know that that's sort of going to happen, that ID will be available to me. So I can use that for the URL because this is the update route, and the update route's always like /todos/ the ID. So then what I can do is I can add, okay, / and then the ID, new to do dot underscore ID. Okay, and that'll make sure that I'm making an API request to the right URL. Okay, then I'm making a put request, application JSON, and this is going to be, technically it's not new to do anymore. So we'll just write updated to do. Semantics matter. But yeah, now it should work once I pass it down. So here the submit func is now going to be update to do. Okay. And if I hit refresh, well, I'll go back to the main page. Okay, so now let's see here. Eat your vegetables is marked as false. And see, now it's incomplete. Cheese is marked as incomplete. Ta-da. Okay, so see, now I can click and edit them. Okay, now last thing we need to do is just delete them. Okay, really that should just be a delete button that you click on and deletes it. So I'll add the delete button first. So that should be inside of the LI. So we'll do this button. There's a button that says delete. There we go. Okay, let me just save this so it cleans that up a little bit. There we go. So there you can see kind of all of that at work. Okay. Now, basically what I want is when you click this button that it's going to delete the thing. So I need to create a function to delete it, which I'm going to do over here. So it's going to be very similar to this, the update to do. So I'll borrow that. Okay. But except this one will be called delete to do. And we'll just change this to deleted to do. So this is fine. This is fine because it's going to be to the URL, except now it's a delete request. Because again, to destroy something, it's going to be a delete request to slash the ID. So slash to do slash the ID. We don't really care about any of this, so this can all go away because we're not sending over any data. We're just saying, hey, delete this one. Here's the ID, delete it. Okay, so that's all we really need to specify. And then afterwards, we get the fresh set of to-dos. So again, after each of these different functions, I'm just getting a fresh set of to-dos, making my life easy. Okay, now I just need to attach this delete to-do function to that button. But that button exists in the display component, so I need to pass that as props to the display component. Okay, so in the display component, I'm going to pass in delete to do equals delete to do. So now I'm receiving that function, and now I can just set it up as a on click event. On or delete or props.delete to do. Props.delete to do. Okay. So now when I click one of these buttons, it should just delete it. Not what I wanted. Why did I click the wrong button? Let's see here. Let's go back to. Oh, because it's still in the LI. That's why. Here's what I need to do then. So for each one of these, instead of the parent element being an LI, or what I'm going to want to do then is refactor this a little bit. Instead of clicking on the LI, let's just make another button. That's edit. Control C, and we'll put the edit button. This will be edit. And then I'm going to just take this on click event and add it to the edit button instead. So let's just space, put that there, save it so I can organize it space-wise for me. There we go. So now, I put it on the, I just need to delete this as well. Doesn't need 2 click events. There we go. And that should do it. So now, if I click delete, oh, still didn't delete. So am I using the right function name? Oh, no, that's right. Let's see here. Let's go to display and edit this to do. Oh, because then delete to do. Yeah, that's right. So let's take a look at delete to do. Oh, I see why, because I'm not passing it which to do. Okay, so here's what I gotta do. I gotta wrap this function in another function so that way I can actually pass it an argument. So I'm saying, hey, when you click the button, run this function, and what this function does is runs delete to do and passes it to do. Because the reason is I can't, when you're using a function, just the function name, you can't put the parentheses or you'll immediately invoke it. So you have to wrap it in another function. So that's essentially what we're doing there. Okay, so now it should work. Cheese. Yep, and there we go. Eat brunch, eat dinner, eat lunch. And again, I can edit it and mark things as complete, done. I can create a to-do. Okay, we got like full functionality in this front end. Now, next thing I would do is I would do some styling and make this prettier. I'm kind of out of time. At this point, we're over an hour. But hey, we built out the functionality in about an hour, and it's pretty sweet. And hopefully we learned some cool things we can do in React in the process. But with that, I will push up this code to GitHub. The link to the repo and the original repo with the API will be in the video description. So that way, if you want to look at the code, you can. But otherwise, I will see you all later.